Well, hi, guys, and thanks for joining. My name is Brandon Ayres from the Cornea Service at Wills Eye Hospital and Ophthalmic Partners of Pennsylvania, and welcome to Best Practices in Keratoconus Management. I got to thank Glucose very much for their support in this project. Now, on this podcast, we're going to discuss, and we already have discussed lots of topics about keratoconus, and I'm able to go and talk to experts around the country and get tips and tricks for them to see what has worked and what hasn't worked in treating keratoconus. We've already done a podcast on the keratoconus or the crosslinking quarterback, which was basically who helps you schedule all these patients. And if you didn't catch that podcast, make sure you go back and watch it. There was lots of great information on that podcast. Now, we've got different topics today. We're going to be talking about the second eye, how we integrate with optometrists, how we get through our day. And my guest today is one of my best friends, not only in ophthalmology, but also just in life. This is Dr. John Berdahl from Vance Thompson Vision in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, he did his residency training in North Carolina at Duke, and then went on to Minnesota Eye Consultants to do his cornea and anterior segment fellowship. And now he is the man, he is the guy in South Dakota to go to when you have a problem. And I know he treats a lot of keratoconus patients. So, John, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Do me a favor, just a quick introduction, and how do you treat, or how has keratoconus impacted what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. So, hey, Brandon, first thing I want to say is you're one of my best friends too. I mean, really, if there is a person that I admire that always does the right thing and does the extra work to take care of his patients as good as they possibly can be, I look up to you a lot, buddy, and I'm lucky to count you as a friend. John Berdahl, ophthalmologist, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the question on the table was, how has keratoconus changed, or how has cross-linking changed my life? Let me count the ways. I did the most number of PKPs that I had ever done my first year of practice. And then a year or two later, we're in the cross-linking trials. And I love not having to take out sutures out of corneas. And I think about all of these patients that we've cross-linked through the years and how many patients we'd be saying, okay, let's remove the one at 2 and at 10. And my life is a lot better because we have to do that, but who cares about my life? Our patients' lives are so much better. Not lifetimes of steroids, not lifetimes of risk of failure, not lifetimes of risks of rupture. And one of my favorite studies that's out there is out of Norway that looks at the decrease in penetrating keratoplasties with the onset of cornea cross-linking, and it's staggering. And this is an enormous advance to the point where there's almost nobody that I'll do a PKP on prior to at least cross-linking them first and seeing what we can do. So my life's a lot better.
Yeah, John, I would agree myself. It's such a better story when we're talking to a patient with keratoconus. And I remember, years ago, and we were part of some of the earlier cross-linking studies too, but prior to collagen cross-linking, it wasn't a real happy story. And you're often telling the story to a patient and their family, because these are so often young patients, where you're saying, hey, you've got potentially a blinding problem, and we're just going to watch it until it gets bad enough to do surgery. And that surgery is great, but not so great. So buck up, don't rub the eye, and let's see what happens. I mean, if I was on the other side of the exam chair, I don't think that would sound all that encouraging. I was traditionally taught that keratoconus is a bilateral process. Like, it's in the other eye. You just might not know it yet. And very often, especially in younger patients, they present with one eye much worse than the other. Now, how often when you see a new patient coming in, are you seeing it in both eyes versus predominantly one eye? And does that change your discussion with the patient?
I would say that it's probably 80% of the time, maybe 85 to 90% of the time, that I would say that it is bilateral, or even if it's asymmetric, it's there. And maybe 10 to 15% of the time, it appears to be unilateral. Now, maybe that's because of how they sleep, or they're right-handed and they only rub on that right eye, and the other one may be coming. So I still think of it as a almost for sure bilateral disease. So it is That eye is at risk until it proves to me over years and years that it's
Mostly, probably, definitely could be bilateral. Yeah,
yeah.
that's how I do it too. And I look really hard at those topographies and tomographies too, because my assumption is if I don't see it yet, I'm probably going to see it.
That's right.
But that also depends on how old the patient is. So how does, like, when you're looking at these topographies and tomographies or talking to your patient, how much does age come into your thought process as to, how often you're seeing, how aggressive you are to treat, and how closely you're looking at that, the contralateral eye that might not be as bad?
Yeah, I'll start with this. I don't think that there's an age at which they are for sure safe. Okay, so even somebody that's 65 or 70 years old that has keratoconus, and we're seeing it for the first time because we got their topography at the time of cataract surgery, I would not say that person is not going to progress. We just don't know yet, but they're a lower likelihood of progressing. The converse of that is you see a 12-year-old that has it in one eye or a 14-year-old, they're almost certainly going to get it in both. They are almost certainly going to progress. And so then take the middle of that group and say somewhere in there, you're probably not going to progress anymore. And somewhere you're almost assuredly progressing. I'll give a quick story. Had a 41-year-old patient come in for a LASIK eval, -3.5, topography is perfect. They didn't have LASIK. They came in 7 years later, bilateral keratoconus. And if I would have done LASIK on that person, I would have thought for sure I induced this as ectasia.
Right.
So there's a lot of, lore out there, especially with cross-linking, that exists.
Yeah, so I had a patient actually today, John. Now a little bit different from your story, but he was 38, and so I still hold that magical age of 40 as when I'm less concerned. I'm never not concerned. I don't care if you're 40, 50, 60, because we've probably both seen progression in those older patient profiles. But classically, 40 is when things slow down. This guy was 38 and he had bilateral keratoconus, obvious on one eye, pretty subtle on the other. And in my initial note, I didn't have a lot of background on him. He didn't come in with a bunch of topographies or refractions, so I was kind of making it up as I went. But I was really concerned about the more severe eye, and I commented in my note that we would probably need to cross-link both eyes. So the first eye with the more severe eye, we cross-linked, and he's now been stable for several exams. So now I probably have 5 or 6 pennicams in this patient over the course of about 2 years. Stabilized on the right eye, and I looked at the left eye today, and it wasn't moving at all. I mean, it hadn't progressed one bit since his initial exam. So I look at that, and I'm like, well, you're 38, we still got to watch, but I'm less worried. He's like, oh, I thought we were going to cross-link the left eye. And I'm like, we might, but it hasn't progressed one bit. You're a little bit older. And I even said, hey, if you were 28 or 18, I wouldn't be waiting. I would just do the procedure. But at 38, I think we can watch this. And if there's even a hint of progression, we're going to get you cross-linked on the second eye. So it's rare that I say we shouldn't do the second eye. But in this case, there was no evidence of progression. It was very, very mild to begin with. And so I watched it. Maybe I did the right thing. Maybe I did the wrong thing. But for me, age makes a difference, a big difference, but it's not the only thing I'm thinking about when I'm looking at those topographies.
That's such an interesting one, Brandon, because if it was my eye, I would have wanted to been cross-linked at 38 with keratoconus in the other eye. I didn't maybe catch over what time period you got those 6 or 7 pennicams.
So I've been seeing them now about 1.5 to 2 years.
Yeah, okay, so a decent amount of time, but not 10 years. And I think that I would have wanted to get cross-linked if it was my eye. But I think it's a jump ball on that. And I'm probably 55, 45 cross-link my other eye, just to make sure to put it out of my mind and decrease the chances that it's going to progress in the future. Probably
Sure.
basically eliminate.
I mean, and the last thing I said was, I think you're fine. I'll see you in 6 months. Right. So, but now in kids, and there's plenty of studies on keratoconus in young kids and children, and they will often present highly asymmetric and in one eye. And I myself, I am so much more aggressive in that, certainly if they're, not even 10 yet, but there's not many kids there. But when they're 12, 14, 16, 17. And when they present with in one eye, I am ultra aggressive at watching, following, and probably cross-linking the second eye. Am I off base there? Is that your take on this too?
Same. And one of the things that I love this story, and it happened 2 years in a row. We got our new fellow. Day one or day two, they're seeing a patient. And I remember this one specifically was a 22-year-old nurse, bilateral keratoconus. Fellow comes out. I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, well, I'm going to bring her back in 6 months. Watch her closely. How come? Well, we don't have evidence of progression yet. And I said, okay, wait a second here. What would you want if it was your eye? And it was, well, I'd want to get cross-linked. Okay. So you're going to recommend to do something different than what you would want for your own eye. And welcome to your second day of fellowship.
Yeah.
So then, well, that doesn't seem quite right. So we go through that whole talk, but I'm like, did you exhaust your ability to demonstrate progression? Did you do the work and go get the changes in refraction that could have been in there from the outside OD? Or did you just say, I don't have progression of it because we've only got one Pentacam? And that's not how it rolls. What separates a great doctor is not typically, maybe with the exception of you, how amazing you are at surgery. It's how hard you'll work for the patient that needs you to work for them. And if that's what we want for our own eye, we should uncover the rocks to find it and be able to make sure we cross-link that patient.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I years ago, and I think I may have even told this story on a prior podcast. My son came to me when he was like maybe 16 or 17. He's like, man, and he's always had great vision. He would show off that he could see like, a gnat on a car 20 meters away. And he's like, my vision's changing, Dad. So and I'm a cornea specialist. So right away, I'm like, oh, you must have keratoconus because you're 17 and you could see and now you can't. I took him to the office, did a topography. I was ready to cross-link him that night. Now, what I found out was that he was a minus 0.5 myope at this point. He had nothing wrong, but that's the kind of attitude and aggression that I want to bring to my patients. If you have something wrong, I want to fix that problem. I want to be part of the solution. And that does mean you have to do some investigating sometimes. And we'll get into the role of the referring optometrist and what we have to do in a little bit, but you do have to be a bit of a keratoconus detective. And if you really believe that that patient is progressing, we need to find the proof of that so that we can get approvals. So, in those young patients, I am very aggressive at looking for progression, finding progression. If it's there, I'm not saying that we make it up, but I'm going to look and look and look. And if it's there, we're going to uncover it to treat as soon as we can.
Yep.
I'm probably going to follow much more often. Do you change your follow-up interval based on, I know we all have kind of this like suspicion quota that we all have from experience, but do you follow your younger patients more often than your older, and say older is 40 and above?
Yeah, I think that no matter what, I'm seeing them at 6 months or less if it's the very first time we've seen them. Whether they're 40, 50, or 12, it's going to be 6 months or less. If the 50-year-old shows me that at 6 months there's nothing there, okay, every year is cool, but not for the 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had pretty good success at documenting progression, getting approvals for, the iLink procedure, the epithelium off collagen cross-linking, the approved procedure. And getting that first eye done is not too bad. We have a coordinator who helps us out, and we get that first eye done. The second eye can sometimes be a challenge. You kind of think, or sometimes think, I'm like, whew, I got the bad one done, but now there's another eye. And have we already documented progression? Is it already approved for cross-linking? Is it progressing? That second eye can be a challenge. And it's so important to get to that eye because sometimes it's probably the better of the two. And that's the eye that the patients are relying on. It's easy to say, yes, you can work on the eye that I can't see from. I already can't see from it. But when you say, I want to do a procedure on your good eye, this is the eye that you rely on for school, for work, for living, for taking care of your family. It's a different story sometimes. And what's your take on getting that second eye done? How aggressive are you?
So the first thing that you said that I'll underline is the better eye is probably the most important eye, because that's the one that you're going to freeze in place at the best position. That's the one that's going to carry them forever. And if they lose vision in that eye, that's what's going to make their life worse.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. One is in the initial note, I am quick to say, keratoconus OD, less severe keratoconus OS, or something like that, or more severe keratoconus OD, keratoconus OS. And I don't want to box myself out of being able to treat it, because my experience has not been that the most reasonable, most educated, most empathetic folks are the ones saying whether or not I can cross-link them, or
Yeah.
whether insurance is going to
If you have
cover
to do a
them.
peer-to-peer, you're probably not talking to an eye care professional at all, and they probably can't say the word keratoconus.
Yeah, they're exactly right. And so I want to put myself in a position to win. And Brandon, you've probably heard me say this before, but there's only one thing that we took an oath to, and that's the patient sitting in front of us, not the insurance company, not what's convenient for me, but that patient sitting there. And so if we know what the right thing to do for the patient is, without lying, we should do the work to try and do that right thing. And I would say that it's easier than ever for things to get covered. I used to do battle in peer-to-peer reviews, and it almost became enjoyable when I got good at it.
Yeah, we've both, I think, lived through the keratoconus era where it was really difficult. It was a major fight to get these procedures approved, and it has definitely gotten easier with a lot of the work that we've put in, and a lot of the work that Glaukos has put in actually to sort of spread the word and get better education to insurance payers. But we still need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our patients. So similar to you, I mean, I always document progressive keratoconus in the right and left eye. One eye may be worse than the other, but it's in both eyes. And I just need to make sure that I don't forget that one eye's done and one eye's not. So I document all over the chart and in follow-up, patient had collagen cross-linking October 23rd of 2024, left eye not cross-linked or not cross-linked yet. And we can't forget about it. And when I'm talking to patients, I will often say, hey, look, we're going to start with your, the more severe eye, be it the right or left, but probably a few weeks or a month or two after that first eye, we need to get on to the left. So I've already planted the seed. And I try to get the approval myself. I mean, I don't do the approvals. We have a billing department who helps us, but I try to get the approval for both the right and left eye at the same time. So the approval is already sitting there. And I'm not sure if you employ a similar technique, but that way, I'm not waiting to hear back from an insurance payer, but can I move forward? It's already there. And as soon as that patient is healed up and feeling better, we can get that second eye taken care of.
That makes two of us. I'm not sure if I do either. And we do two eyes at a time or one eye at a time. I suspect that our billing team does both eyes at a time, because you're already submitting the claim. And then if they're pushing back, then we'll roll with that. One of the things that's always been a little curious to me about keratoconus is, I glaucoma specialist too. And it's crazy to me to think that we would wait for glaucoma to progress before intervening. But we do that in keratoconus, and it's probably just a function of the label.
I do try very hard to show progression in one way, shape, or form for those patients and make sure that we can get both eyes done. And now that we're heading to the end of the year, so I'm not sure when people are listening to this podcast, but we're now in early, almost mid-December. I'm hearing a lot of patients talking to me about, hey, can I get that second eye done? Because I don't want to pay another $5,000 next year. So sometimes being done at the end of the year has a financial benefit to get it done before the year flips, and they have to have that deductible again. So we've been doing more and more second eyes in the past couple of weeks just to make sure they get done before the end of the year. They all need it anyway. So if we can do it sooner, it's better for our patients. So that little bit of financial pressure is sometimes just the nudge that patients need to get them over the hip and say, yeah, I know it hurt for a couple of days, but let's get this done. I don't want to pay for this again. So I'll take any reason to get that second eye treated when those patients need it.
Yep, completely agree.
So probably nobody, maybe nobody in the world has a better referral network than Vance Thompson Vision. And I don't know that for sure, John, but you guys do a really good job working with both integrated optometrists and outside optometrists. So how does this interplay work with you guys when you're seeing patients referred in for keratoconus? What are you looking for from those referring doctors? What do you get help with? in the office from your internal optometrist? How does that machine work for you?
Yeah. So first thing is that we're in a rural state, and almost every patient that we see has a primary eye care doctor that they've been working with, all their life and developed trust with. And so that means that basically everybody in our state that has keratoconus is in an optometrist's office. And we know that these people need to get cross-linked. And so we've spent a lot of time, a lot of time with our referring optometric network, educating about how do you detect keratoconus? What are the clues? So obviously eye rubbing. A fair amount of them in our region have topography, but a number of them don't. And so basically we say if their astigmatism is changing, or they're becoming more nearsighted, or you can't correct them crisply, and notice that those were all ors, not ands, they need to have a topography. And so if you don't have access to one, send them over and we'll check. And basically everybody that has keratoconus should be getting crosslink unless proven otherwise. So you got to detect it and you got to treat it. So I think that that's been really successful for us. And, we drained a bathtub and now we've got a consistent stream of generally, younger-ish 45 and less keratoconus patients that gets treated. And I'm sure that there is plenty that gets missed. And frankly, it's a little easier for me than it is for them because I'm not really responsible for the whole eyeball. I'm just saying, they say, do they have keratoconus? And we snap a topography and say yes. No. And then they generally go back and do their follow-up care with their optometrist, especially if they're doing scleral lens fittings and their optometrist does that.
And some of the things that we've talked about on this podcast, looking at the second eye, following progression, getting the first eye done, and then making sure they come back for the second one. Do you also try and get that message across to your referring population and your other referring optometrists and ophthalmologists? It's not just optometrists that refer into you guys, it's optometrists and ophthalmologists, but making sure that they know how important it is for that patient to come back to get that second eye treated is just as important as it is for you and I talking about this, because if they don't come back again, it is almost impossible to track every single one of these patients. So making sure that they return as the reminder for us to get that second eye done, I think is important. And is that part of your educational outreach to your referring population?
Yes, it is part of our educational outreach, but what we really do to mitigate it is we book both eyes at the first visit.
Okay.
And so we just get it done so it's on the schedule and it's already in the machine. And then if for some reason we decide not to do the second eye, that's the active decision. The passive decision is to move forward on the second eye.
Yeah. So easier to cancel than to try and track a patient down and reschedule. And about how far apart do you put those visits or the procedures?
Yeah. About a month on average. Depends on a little bit on what's going on in their lives, but I would do it a day apart if needed, because if somebody came in and saw us today and needed to get both done by the end of the year, we'd do them back to back on 2 separate days if we needed to.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've been to your office, and I know people will travel, 4 or 5 hours probably isn't a long day for some of those patients coming in to see you. Here on the East Coast in Philly, people think they've come forever if they've driven, 45 minutes, or they come from, one state away, New Jersey, which I could throw a rock onto, but people think it's a drive around the block sometimes to just take a couple hour drive to see you guys. So probably making sure you get those 2 eyes done efficiently, less driving back and forth, probably pretty important in those patients.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Meet them where they're at, make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do.
All right, John, we've covered an awful lot of topics today, looking at topographies, looking at the second eye, getting the second eye treated, working with your referring population. I mean, I really, really appreciate your time. I always enjoy talking to you, not only about professional stuff, but personal stuff too. You're a friend, a mentor, and, it's funny. You're just one of the people who I look up to in ophthalmology, and I think I'm a couple of years older than you, which is weird, but that's okay. Thanks for being you, and thanks for all the support you give us and here talking about patients with keratoconus. Thank you once again, guys, for joining us on our podcast, Best Practices in Keratoconus Management. Special thanks to John Berdahl for joining us today, and special thanks to Glaukos for supporting the project. Now, remember, there is a survey link in the description below. Make sure you fill that out so we can get more topics and subjects for further podcasts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed.